Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rola Pispiragou. Rola Pispiragou was born in 1989 in Patras, Greece. She had a younger sister named Dimitra, who was 8 years her junior. The sisters primarily grew up with their grandparents. Rola was known for her spirited personality and was often described as a mischievous girl. She pursued a medical education to become a nurse, but never worked in that field. Throughout her life, she tried various professions, but her true passion was football. While working as a football referee, Rola met her future husband, Manos Daskalaki, who was a goalkeeper at the time. Rola, 22 years old, was deeply in love with 19-year-old Manos. They began dating, and soon after, Rola became pregnant, and they decide to marry. Manos's parents opposed their relationship, feeling embarrassed by Rola's unusual behavior and the fact that she was 3 years older than him. However, this did not stop Manos. They got married in 2012. And soon after, their daughter Georgina was born. Like her mother, Georgina also developed a love for football, and Rola took her to training sessions. In 2015, Melina, Manos and Rola's second daughter, was born. Although on the surface they looked like a happy family with 2 children, in reality, many problems still existed within. They frequently argued, and Rola struggled with depression, having attempted to end her life twice without success. A tragedy struck on April 13, 2019, when their 3.5-year-old daughter Melina died. She had been hospitalized with symptoms of a rare form of leukemia, which doctors assured them was fully treatable. Melina has overcome the disease, she was set to return home, everything seemed fine. On that fateful day, Rola was at the hospital with Melina. The little girl was in a cheerful mood, enjoying shashlik that her parents had brought. However, everything changed abruptly after her father, Manos, stepped out of the room. According to Rola, they settled down for a nap shortly after he left. About an hour later, a nurse came in to administer medication, and just 10 minutes after that, at 4:40 p.m., Melina began trembling, wheezing, and have a seizure. Rola cried out for her daughter, but when that didn't help, she ran to summon the nurses. They rushed to assist Melina, but it was too late. A forensic expert later determined that the cause of death was liver failure and pulmonary edema. The family was deeply affected by their grief. Manos and Rola are back together, and their marriage grew stronger. In 2021, they welcomed their third child, Irita, and they felt happy again, believing that nothing could disrupt their joy. Tragically, just 6 months later, the baby passed away. She passed away in her sleep at their home in March 2021, while sharing a room with her mother, Rola. According to the forensic examination, she died of sinus node aplasia and heart cell degeneration, leading to cardiac arrest. This disease usually occurs in the elderly and is rarely seen in children. However, doctors believe that this is a congenital disease. On that tragic night, Rola's sister Dimitra was not staying over, leaving Rola alone with the baby. Around 7:30 a.m., Irita woke up, and Rola gave her a pacifier before they both tried to go back to sleep. When they checked on Irita at 11 a.m., she was unresponsive. In a panic, Rola called Manos for help and attempted to perform CPR. After several unsuccessful tries, she decided to call an ambulance. An hour later, the paramedics arrived and confirmed Irita's death. Her body had already begun to cool and stiffen. The loss of her second child, Irita, raised many questions about Rola's actions. Why did she not call an ambulance right away, instead of trying to resuscitate her child and contacting Manos? Valuable time was lost, and there were concerns that Irita might have been saved. Rola explained that she was in shock, and an hour later, she realized she needed to call an ambulance. The family was left with one child, their eldest daughter Georgina. Before Irita's death, the relationship between Manos and Rolla was already strained, and the loss only increased the emotional distance between them. Their problems are getting more and more stressful, and divorce seemed imminent. Georgina also suffered from many health problems. Just 15 days after Irita's passing, she was hospitalized due to convulsions. The medical team tried their best to resuscitate her, and thanks to their efforts, she survived. However, she was diagnosed with heart failure, which led to the implantation of a defibrillator and a pacemaker. Following this, she was closely monitored by doctors and had to be re-hospitalized multiple times for encephalopathy, the cause of which remained unknown. She experienced seizures, and despite thorough examinations, the reasons for them could not be identified. The doctors decided to transfer her to a different clinic for further evaluation. Tragically, on January 29, 2022, 9-year-old Georgina passed away. This news shocked everyone, especially since she had seemed healthy. As doctors were trying to save the girl, her mother, Rolla, suddenly declared her dead. She asked them to stop, saying that it was pointless and that she would not come back to life. She also said that Georgina had endured a lot of pain and suggested that it would be better for them to let her rest in peace. Rolla's calm demeanor during this moment surprised the medical staff. A few hours after Georgina's passing, Rolla shared a post on social media expressing her feelings. She stated that she had given life to Georgina but was upset that Georgina had left her. Rolla highlighted that Georgina brought her joy and was a source of strength in her life. In her farewell message to her daughter, she wished Georgina to enjoy her reunion with her sisters. Rolla also expressed that, in her heart, Georgina would always be with her, and she affirmed her love for all 3 of her children. In memory of her children, Rolla got tattoos. She got her first tattoo after Georgina was born, and the others were done after the deaths of her 2 daughters, Melina and Irita. The circumstances surrounding the deaths of her 3 daughters raised suspicions. They all died within 3 years, one after the other. In each case, their health conditions appeared to be stable, and doctors were initially optimistic about their recovery. However, doctors were shocked by the sad outcome. This caused many doubts and speculations. Some people believed the Pespirigu family was cursed and that these deaths were the result of supernatural forces. Doctors were skeptical of Rolla's explanation for her daughter's death and contacted law enforcement to investigate. The focus was on the eldest daughter, Georgina, as they had her medical records and her body for further examination. Investigators interviewed 20 doctors from 5 hospitals in Athens and Patras who had treated Georgina. A discrepancy arose between what the doctors reported and what Rolla claimed. Initially, doctors suspected Georgina had heart problems. But later tests revealed little girl did not have any heart issues. Rolla frequently reported seizures and neurological issues, but examinations did not show any evidence of these conditions. Instead, Georgina was diagnosed with gastroenteritis and psychological issues stemming from the deaths of her 2 younger sisters, and little girl was discharged. However, little girl was readmitted due to seizures, and her condition remained unclear. Plans were made to transfer her to a hospital with better monitoring capabilities, but unfortunately, she died before that could happen, despite appearing healthy at the time. Before her death, Georgina told doctors she felt as if there was a bomb in her stomach about to explode. She was concerned and tried to understand the deaths of her younger sisters, Melina and Irita, fearing something similar might happen to her. She shared her concerns with the doctors at the hospital. Manos and Rolla initially denied any involvement in the children's deaths. They did some interviews and finally cleared the doubts about them. They spoke of the traumatic experience they faced, often using the word suddenly to stress that their children died unexpectedly and without warning, even though there were no signs that anything bad was imminent. According to Rolla, Georgina had difficulty breathing. However, toxicology tests revealed no issues. The doctor confirmed that Georgina had no heart problems and mentioned her sudden death. However, the investigation is still ongoing. It was discovered that Rulla was present with her 3 children at all 3 incidents, but she asserted that this said nothing. Rulla declares that she is the children's mother, and that she has always been there for them. She didn't understand why that surprised everyone and told them to stop talking nonsense. Manos blamed the doctors and was confused because all tests showed the children's was healthy before his sudden death. He believed the treatment may have been wrong. Although toxicological tests performed after the girls' deaths yielded no findings. They were only conducted for the most common substances. So it was decided to do more extensive testing that would not normally be done. In the case involving Irita's death, Rulla called an ambulance too late. Similarly, in the case with Melina, Rulla delayed seeking help and only contacted the nurses 35 minutes after Melina had died, by which point her body had started to cool. Why did it take Rulla so long to ask for help? A forensic expert observed small scratches on Melina's nose, indicating that there might have been a struggle. In addition, tests showed that the concentration of ketamine in Georgina's body was very high, 6 times the normal amount used for anesthesia. Ketamine is not available at regular pharmacies and is hard to obtain, indicating that it could not have entered her system by accident. The drug was injected into Georgina's body just 20 minutes before her death. The question arises, who could have administered the ketamine if the doctors did not? The medical staff had last checked on her shortly before she died. And since Rulla was the only person present in the hospital room when little girl passed away, Rulla became a suspect in the murder. Later, the bodies of the 2 other girls, Melina and Irita, were exhumed. While no ketamine was found, but experts concluded that both Melina and Irita died of suffocation, and their deaths were classified as murder. A bloody handkerchief was discovered next to the baby's body. This handkerchief had been taken from the house. Rulla had requested its return but was denied. On March 30, 2022, police arrested 33-year-old Rulla Pispirigu at her younger sister's house in Patras. Rulla had a medical degree and was capable of obtaining the drug. She knows her actions well and does them consciously. Investigators established that several years ago, she attended seminars related to criminology. Rulla's younger sister, Dimitra, refused to believe that Rulla could be responsible for the children's deaths. She stated that she did not believe Rulla would have harmed her daughters and that if they did not die of natural causes, then someone else was to blame and should be punished. Dimitra confirmed that she did not see anything unusual while in the house during the time of Irita's death. However, others described Rulla as cold and emotionless, suggesting she could potentially be responsible for the tragedy. During the investigation of Georgina's notebook, a piece of paper was discovered that said, "Her mother, Rulla, is very evil." Neighbors reported witnessing Rulla physically abuse Georgina when little girl was just a baby. They informed the police, and the complaint was forwarded to social services, which monitored the family by making regular visits to their home. A message was found on Rulla's phone that she sent the day before Georgina's death, stating, "See what happens tomorrow." This message became a crucial piece of evidence against her. After Rulla's arrest, her husband, Manos, learned about the evidence and became convinced of her guilt, leading him to file for divorce. He was shocked by her actions and don't understand what her motive is. Manos mentioned that she was pregnant at the time of Georgina's death, but he suspected the child was not his since they had not been intimate for a long time. Following Georgina's death, Rulla quickly ended her pregnancy. Manos believed she might have been seeing another man to provoke jealousy, and he also questioned whether their middle daughter, Melina, and youngest daughter, Irita, were his biological children. When Rulla learned about the divorce, she became very angry. She sent a message to her friend, expressing her desire to cast a spell on her husband, Manos, to prevent him from leaving her. 2 weeks before Georgina's death, Manos proposed a divorce, prompting she to consult fortune tellers in hopes of keeping he. Unfortunately, this did not help. So what could Rola's motives be? Initially, there was speculation that she might have Munchausen syndrome. This is a condition in which caregivers intentionally harm or create health problems for the person they care for, in order to gain attention or sympathy. However, this theory was later dismissed. It was then revealed that Manos had a mistress. Rola was aware of the infidelity and was contemplating divorce herself. She desperately attempted to hold on to her husband, possibly seeking to regain his attention and rebuild the family. Rola's younger sister, Dimitra, does not accept this hypothesis. She asserts that she advised Rola to divorce Manos due to issues in their marriage. Although Rola understood the problems, she hesitated to divorce for the sake of their children. Dimitra found it hard to believe that Rola could be capable of such actions. A psychiatrist who evaluated Rola concluded that her thoughts were entirely centered on her husband. She was obsessed with him, exhibiting intense jealousy towards other women. After Rola was arrested, about 500 people gathered outside her home, expressing outrage and demanding the death penalty for killing her 3 children. At that time, her mother, younger sister, and other relatives were inside the home. The trial in this case is still in progress. Rola is currently in custody, housed in a solitary VIP cell that includes various amenities. She does not interact with other inmates, and for her safety, she is under constant surveillance due to concerns that she may attempt to end her life. Rola is charged with the murder of 3 children, but she continues to deny all allegations. She insists that she is a victim who has lost children and freedom. She believes this is a misunderstanding and is confident that she will be acquitted, released from prison, and able to repair her relationship with Manos. She has not yet accepted the reality of her divorce. Rola's ex-husband, Manos, wants nothing to do with her. He is in a new relationship, planning a wedding, and hoping to have children. On March 29, 2024, Rola Pispiragou was sentenced to life in prison by a jury in Athens. The jury unanimously found her guilty of the murder of her eldest daughter, Georgina. The court agreed with the prosecutor's recommendation for the sentence. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat, the case of John Thomas Maguire. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were 2 sisters who lived in an orphanage. Living in an orphanage can be extremely challenging. You don't have a place of your own or time to yourself, and if you're unable to stand up for yourself, you're at risk of being bullied by kids who have been there longer. Typically, bullies target children who are loners. Sisters Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were luckier than most because they can always protect each other. They feel comfortable being around each other and don't try to make friends with anyone. Unfortunately for Anna Marie and Anna Marie, their family secret is about to be revealed. Their father, Larry, has been convicted and imprisoned, and this news has been widely broadcast on television by various news sources. One day, the McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, helped a new girl named Meredith who was being bullied. Meredith had been living with her mother, who was addicted to drugs. After her mother's death from an overdose, Meredith was too afraid to call for help and stayed with her mother's body for a few days. It wasn't until a friend visited and found her mother's body that emergency services were called. Meredith soon became friends with the McClure sisters, and the 3 of them had a lot of fun together. Amanda and Anna Marie never told anyone why they were living in an orphanage. And when Meredith asked, Anna Marie made up a story about their father being a police officer who died while on duty to catch a dangerous criminal. Meredith was so impressed with Anna Marie's story that she told it to the other children at the camp. Overnight, the McClure sisters became heroes and were admired by everyone. Most of the kids in the shelter had parents who had died from substance abuse or were in prison, so the McClure sisters' story made them stand out in a positive way. The sisters' secluded life at the orphanage came to an end when all the children wanted to befriend them. However, this marked the beginning of a difficult period in their lives. A heartbreaking truth comes to light: their father, presumed dead, is actually alive and serving a prison sentence for violence and sex crimes he committed against minors. The sisters' lives became a nightmare. However, they got a second chance when two different families decided to adopt them. This meant they would be living apart, and their bond was eventually broken. Amanda, who had previously worried her adoptive parents. They were worried that she would be single forever, and that not having a biological family had a profound effect on her mental health. Amanda's adoptive parents were relieved to learn that she was in a serious relationship with a man named John Thomas McGuire, who was 38 years old. This would be his second marriage, and he had 2 sons from a previous marriage. What reassured them even more was that John seemed to be a perfect partner and always supported her. He also had a friendly relationship with his ex-wife, which was a good sign for Amanda's future with him. After serving his sentence, Larry McClure was pardoned and settled in Virginia. His first priority was to find his daughters. He went straight to Amanda's foster parents, Glenn and Alex, said hello and introduced himself. He asked to see Amanda and requested her contact information, including her address and phone number. Although Larry appeared disheveled and intimidating, with deep wrinkles and dark circles under his eyes, he didn't seem intoxicated. However, his behavior was not quite right. Glenn, Amanda's foster parent, refused Larry's request but promised to inform Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry was taken aback by the term biological father, but he thanked Glenn and left. Glenn did keep his promise. He told Amanda that her father was free and was looking for her. Amanda was torn, with a part of her wanting to reject her father, given his past mistakes, and another part wanting to give him another chance. Amanda reaches out to her father, Larry, after many years of separation. Amanda initiates the conversation by calling her father, who is overjoyed to hear from her. Larry asks about her well-being, and she shares that she's doing well, married, and happy. Larry was very happy for his daughter and invited her and her husband to have dinner with him. Amanda is initially uncertain about meeting her father, but he senses her hesitation and reassures her by telling her to forget the old grudges, and he has lived all these years with only one thought: to see her and Marie. This suggests that Larry has been thinking about his daughters and wants to see them again. Larry's meetings with Amanda and John led to their introduction to the world of illegal substances, which he manufactured himself in his camper. Initially, their financial situation was stable, but Larry manipulated them into funding his substance production. As their addiction deepened, they both lost their jobs. Larry persuaded John to register as a drug addict to receive $180 in state assistance. However, this amount was insufficient to support their habit, and Larry continued to exploit them for money. Meanwhile, Larry met Anna Marie and repeated the same pattern, getting her hooked on substances and taking her money. Amanda and John's situation spiraled out of control. They accumulated huge debts, lost their house, and were forced to move into Larry's camper. John's parents, who were unaware of the situation, were told that they was going on a trip together. In reality, Amanda and John had become entrenched in a cycle of substance abuse and alcohol consumption with Larry, and John's parents have never heard from their son since. On Valentine's Day, John, still reeling from the effects of substance abuse, planned a romantic evening for his wife Amanda at the family circle. He cooked a fancy dinner, inviting Larry and Anna Marie to join them. However, under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a disturbing situation unfolded. Amanda and Larry, who were supposed to be father and daughter, began to develop an inappropriately close relationship. Sadly, John was unaware of this, and as a result, he became redundant in their twisted relationship. During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, which made Larry extremely anxious. As the tension increased, Larry interrupted John's speech and asked if he could be completely honest with his wife. John agreed, and Larry suggested a game. They tied John's legs and instructed him to answer truthfully about his life. Initially, the questions covering topics like childhood and school. However, under the influence of drugs, Larry began to accuse John of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied this, they hit him. Although John begging for mercy, but he was ultimately struck on the head with a bottle of wine, the same wine he had brought for the family dinner. Over the course of 2 days, Larry, Amanda, and Anna Marie subjected John to torture while using illegal substances. When they thought it was time to end things, Amanda put a black bag over John's head and tightened it around his neck until he stopped breathing. They buried John in the backyard and then celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, with more drugs and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their mental health worsened. They began to hallucinate, seeing John's ghost, hearing police sirens, and imagining that the ground where they buried John was disturbed as if he might escape and report everything to the authorities. The situation was chaotic, but the father and daughters still decided to take more drastic action. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and examined his pupils' reaction to light, even though he showed clear signs of decomposition. This, however, did not convince them that he was truly gone. In a frantic bid to prevent John from coming back to life, they dismembered his body with a wood axe and drove aspen stakes into each piece. They then buried the remains in different locations and covered them with lime to accelerate the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda got married. To conceal their relationship, Larry changed his name. The new family aimed to start afresh, moving to Kentucky. They promised each other to stop using illegal substances for good. To avoid suspicion, they even hung an American flag over their front door, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents were becoming increasingly concerned about his lack of contact. In 2019, John's mother even filed a police report regarding his disappearance. Meanwhile, Larry failed to inform the police about his move to another state, which violated his probation terms and led to his return to prison. Larry's mental state deteriorated, especially after long-term substance abuse and alcohol use. This sent him into rehab, leading to anxiety and confusion between what was real and what wasn't, reflected in his disturbing behavior. Larry suspected that the parole violation was merely a pretext for authorities to search his backyard for John's remains. He felt an urgent need to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and instruct them to dig up the body parts and rebury them far from their home. Since all prisoner calls are monitored, he had to find a discreet way to communicate this information. Larry meticulously prepared a speech to convey his message, but ultimately, he was denied the opportunity to make calls. Unable to cope with the situation any longer, he decided to confess to the police. Larry thought that if he confessed to the murder before being charged, he might avoid the death penalty. He even considered blaming his daughters to make his situation better. However, the police officer did not believe him. First of all, what murder? What body parts were buried in the backyard? What crazy idea did this man have? Legally, they had to verify his claims. Initially, the police planned to conduct an investigation. They took his statement, and they found out that John was indeed missing. A police unit was sent to Larry's house. First on the scene, Investigators found evidence that Larry had mentioned, confirming all of the criminal's statements. The McClure sisters were quickly apprehended. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, unable to believe that their father and stepfather could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more stunned to learn that Larry was trying to portray himself as an innocent bystander, claiming in his testimony that it was his daughters who killed John, and he was just unwittingly involved in the crime. As the investigation unfolded, each the family McClure member sought to protect themselves and convinced the police that their involvement was purely accidental. This situation was particularly difficult for John's relatives because there was no body, only remains were found. Those remains had to be carefully collected by forensic experts, transported to his parents, and ultimately buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many that John was a kind person. Despite the challenges they faced, his parents were able to arrange for his burial. Some friends contributed financially, while others assisted with transportation and funeral planning. John was laid to rest at a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15, the day after Valentine's Day, a member of the McClure family posted on Facebook, claiming it was a message from John. The post stated that he was going on a long trip and would be out of touch, asking friends not to worry about his absence. This raised suspicions that the family McClure had planned to kill John, and they wanted to deceive others to avoid causing panic. Despite the severity of the crime, but during the trial, Larry and Amanda received an additional 6 months in their sentence due to their illegal father-daughter marriage, which is prohibited in the state. The trial began, and Larry testified. He revealed that he had always felt remorse for his children throughout his life. He explained that when they were very young, he committed a serious crime that led to them being placed in an orphanage. Their birth mother had abandoned them, and he was the only one left feeling heartbroken. Larry expressed deep gratitude towards the families who adopted his children, mentioning that he had even prayed for their adoptive parents in churches. He desperately wanted to make up for the years gone by with them and admitted that this might be why he made the choices he did. He describes John as a wonderful young man and expresses his grief for him. He says that if he could change the past, he would, but emphasizes that no one can bring the dead back to life. He mentions his deep love for his daughter Amanda. However, he notes that Amanda does not care about John. Her only concern is taking money from his account. He questions whether anyone would consider killing someone for $180, and that people should recognize Amanda for what she was. He called her a monster, not a human. He stated that he, Amanda and Marie, were addicted to drugs and that they deserved to be punished for their actions. He expressed his desire to speak to the jury and said that regardless of his sentence, he was aware of his health problems and believed that he might not live more than 10 years. He expressed regret for John's passing and again apologized to all of John's loved ones. The trial dragged on because the defendants kept changing their statements about whether they killed John or not. Amanda, unable to bear the long trial, made a deal with investigators. In return, she was assured that she would be charged with involuntary manslaughter at her next trial. Larry then gave another speech. He said, "The 4 of us bought the ingredients to make illegal drugs. Amanda came to me and shared her wish to get revenge on John. The reality is that John, while high on drugs, assaulted Anna Marie, which led to her becoming pregnant. For me, I needed to regain my daughter's trust after years apart. I felt I could not refuse their demands. I often blamed myself for what had happened and thought about ending my life. But I wondered, why should I suffer when this crime was committed by them?" After Larry's speech, it was John's family's turn to speak. John's mother cried uncontrollably and could not express her emotions. She expressed, "Even if one day I can forgive the McClure family, I will never forget what they did. I also hope I live long enough to see one of them die before me." Next, John's children spoke, cursing the killers and declaring that they would never forgive them. The judge delivered the final verdict, sentencing Larry McClure to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence for Amanda was revealed, her adoptive parents regretted telling her that her biological father was looking for her. They had always raised her with the freedom to make her own choices, unaware that this freedom could lead to such dire consequences. At the time the verdict was announced, Amanda stated that her father's jealousy was the root cause of the situation. Her adoptive parents pleaded with the judge to consider that Amanda's involvement in the crime was heavily influenced by Larry's negative impact, asserting that she would never have committed such a violent act otherwise. However, the prosecutors argued that the murder was a planned act, suggesting that Amanda and Larry were conspiring to be together as a couple. The initial hearing focused on Amanda, who was sentenced to 40 years. The judge said Amanda could serve only 20 years. During Anna Marie's sentencing, she attempted to speak out against John's murder. However, she felt pressured by her father and sister to do what they wanted, and she only attended Larry and Amanda's wedding out of concern for her own future. Ultimately, Anna Marie was sentenced to 40 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his early years. At the age of 20, he decided to serve his country and joined the military. Christopher committed himself to protecting the peace and safety of his fellow citizens. Christopher was stationed at a military base near Marquette, where he met Terry O'Donnell, a young teacher from Iron River. They lived in the same area and would often see each other around town as they spent more time together. They remained close friends for many years, but Christopher eventually decided to leave the military and move to Traverse City. Despite the distance between them, they continued to communicate regularly, and in December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take their relationship to the next level. Terry and Christopher have known each other for many years. They find they have a lot in common. They decide to live together. Terry and Christopher choose Iron River as the perfect place for them to settle down. Christopher finds a job at a factory that makes parts for military ships, where he becomes a supervisor. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began to arise in their relationship. Unfortunately, they didn't make an effort to work through their issues, and it became clear that their relationship was coming to an end. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to go their separate ways. Despite the breakup, they were able to part on good terms and remain friends. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher realized that he couldn't live in her house anymore, so he decided to rent his own house. He felt that the town he lived in was too small, and he wanted a more dynamic city. Christopher began applying for jobs in various locations, sending out his resume in search of a new job. In October 2014, Christopher found a job in Asheville, North Carolina. As Christopher settled into his new life in Asheville, he contacted Terry on October 14th, telling her that he would be taking the day off tomorrow and looking forward to meeting Terry for a walk. However, on October 15th, Christopher did not contact Terry as planned. Terry became worried and tried calling him for several days, but he did not answer. She even contacted their mutual friends. 10 days after Christopher went missing, Terry filed a police report. The police accepted the report and told Terry that Christopher had probably moved to a new job in North Carolina and that he had started a new life and wanted to contact old friends. To avoid speculation, investigators conducted a thorough investigation. They identified Christopher's new workplace and contacted an employee to gather information. However, surprisingly, they found out that Christopher had not shown up to work in 10 days. The police then suspected that he might have been involved in an accident, given his frequent solo outdoor trips. The search for Christopher led investigators to the local woods, where he was known to frequent. Trained search dogs were brought in to aid in the effort. But no signs of Christopher were found. Terry, concerned that Christopher may have been injured or in an accident, suggested searching his former apartment. The investigators agreed and visited the apartment, where they were met with a scene of disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor, and closets were left open. Initially, they thought that Christopher might have simply been messy, but Terry disputed this, stating that Christopher was typically neat and organized. The detectives started to suspect a connection between the recent events and the crime. After investigating Christopher's home, they decided to expand their search. A thorough search of the neighborhood led them to find Christopher's car 8 miles outside Iron River, near the city limits. The police found it unusual that the car was left there, suggesting it might have been abandoned unintentionally. After forcing open a door, they searched the interior and found nothing suspicious, only ordinary clothing. However, one of the officers noticed a small yellow piece of paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it. They decided to follow the route to see where it led. Although the paper did not specify an exact address, the directions were clear. According to Terry, Christopher, although familiar with the city of Iron River, did not know the local street names, so he wrote down the directions using landmarks such as bus stops and gas stations. Terry deduced from the detailed notes that this was Christopher's first time visiting the location. The detectives followed the route outlined on the paper, which led them to a nearby town and a specific house mentioned in Christopher's notes. When they arrived, they knocked on the door to gather information in Christopher's connection to the location. A man named Jason Cochran answered the door, and his wife Kelly was there. The police explained that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and had found a lead pointing to this address. Terry, who worked with Christopher at the same factory, revealed that they were co-workers. She had tried to contact Christopher via text message in mid-October but had not received a response. Investigators found a note in Christopher's car that showed the route to Jason's house. Although confused, Jason and Kelly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After a short interrogation without any further clues, the detectives left Jason Cochran's house. Detectives then interviewed Christopher's co-workers at the factory. A supervisor shared that Christopher had been having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which was an open secret among employees. This revelation sparked interest, leading investigators to re-question the Jason and Kelly. During re-interrogation, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher. However, she claimed that she could not reveal this information earlier because her husband Jason was present. According to Kelly, Jason agreed to her affair. However, Christopher's colleagues disputed Kelly's story. They claimed that Jason did not approve of Kelly's affair. When Jason was later brought in for questioning, he completely denied approving of Kelly's affair. His strong objection to Kelly's infidelity aroused suspicion and made him a suspect. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance was ongoing, but the lack of concrete evidence made it impossible to determine whether Kelly was involved. As a result, Kelly and Jason were released from the police station. The case remained unsolved for 5 months. In March 2015, a new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department, took over the case. Jeremy Ogden began by thoroughly examining the Jason Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together soon after graduation. They had distinct personalities. Kelly was outgoing, sociable, and talkative, while Jason was quiet and reserved. He rarely initiated conversations, only responding to questions asked of him. Despite their differences, they decided to get married. After the wedding, they started a business together, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it provided a decent income for they. Jason handled most of the pool maintenance work, but the constant stress and physical strain took a toll on his health. He began to experience back problems and felt increasingly heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he could no longer continue running the business. Kelly then took over the responsibilities of running the business, hoping that Jason would soon recover and return to his duties. However, his condition continued to worsen, and medical treatments were not providing the desired relief. Kelly searched for alternative ways to help her husband recover. During her search, Kelly discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the plant was banned in their home state, making it inaccessible to them. To access the treatment, Kelly and Jason decided to relocate to Michigan, specifically Iron River Township, in 2014. Jason consulted his doctor and received a prescription for pain medication. Around the same time, in early 2014, Jason's wife, Kelly Cochran, started working at a factory that manufactured parts for U.S. warships. Kelly and Jason moved to the area. Kelly and Jason worked at the same factory where Christopher Reagan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This friendship was especially important to Christopher. After gathering evidence, prosecutors presented their case to a Michigan judge to obtain a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. The judge granted the warrant, and on March 6, a team of investigators searched Kelly and Jason's home, carefully searching for any evidence related to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant discovery was a book written by Jason. He used a pseudonym in the world of video games. The title of the work was ordinary, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described the murder of the person who had harmed him. After reading the book, the detectives noticed a character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Christopher. This raised suspicions about Jason, leading them to wonder if he had been inspired by the real-life crimes he had committed. 3 weeks later, a second search of Jason's home was conducted. The police hoped to find crucial evidence that had been missed in the first search. However, when they arrived at the Jason's home, they found it empty, with no cars in sight. Repeated attempts to knock on the door went unanswered. It was later discovered that Kelly and Jason had fled the state shortly after the initial search, moving to Indiana. Their sudden departure left investigators concerned. Michigan police, needing a DNA sample, asked Indiana police for help. Indiana police went to Jason's new home, where they had just moved. The investigation into Christopher Reagan's disappearance ran out of clues. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Hobart, Indiana, police received a frantic call from Kelly Cochran, who tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, Kelly was in a panic. It was clear that Jason was beyond saving. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning like fire, as if he had overheated. The doctors officially confirmed Jason's death. His body was then sent for a thorough forensic examination. Meanwhile, Kelly was handed over to a police patrol and taken to relatives who lived nearby. To piece together what happened, investigators thoroughly searched the Jason's new home. During the search, a police officer found a syringe at the foot of Jason in his wife's bed. Initially, investigators believed Jason's death was due to substance abuse. The medical examiner's report showed that Jason had multiple drugs in his system, but Jason's death was due to strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. The focus of the investigation then shifted to Kelly Cochran, who appeared to be connected to both crimes. She was now considered the prime suspect in not only Christopher's disappearance but also her husband's murder. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was summoned to the police station to answer questions about her husband's death. Under direct questioning and pressure from investigators, Kelly denied any involvement in her husband's death and Christopher's disappearance. She claimed that Jason's death was due to a drug overdose. Months later, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to convict Kelly. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. Kelly informed Walter of Jason's death, who then contacted the police. Walter shared his insights with investigators, saying he did not believe Jason's death was caused by drugs. He claimed that Jason had used herbs to relieve his chronic back pain. In March of the previous year, Jason confided in Walter about his concerns. Jason and Kelly were asked to go to Indiana because the Iron River police suspected them of being involved in Christopher's disappearance. This had a significant impact on Jason, leading to depression. Walter observed the notable change in Jason's behavior, with Kelly increasingly taking control over his life. Jason appeared to be constantly anxious, and he began to avoid social gatherings as soon as Kelly returned from work. As the investigation progressed, this information became a vital link. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to pressure Kelly into revealing the truth about Jason's death. Walter, Jason's friend, was used as bait to lure Kelly into a trap. On March 12, 2016, Walter, under police surveillance and equipped with a listening device, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a letter containing important information before his death, with the condition that it be sent to the police if anything happened to him. However, Kelly surprisingly asked Walter to drop the idea, which caught both Walter and the police off guard. Despite this development, the detective still lacked direct evidence to build a case. In the weeks following her initial questioning, Kelly was subjected to multiple interrogations by investigators trying to uncover the truth. Despite their efforts, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, on April 26, 2016, it became apparent that Kelly Cochran had evaded the scrutiny of investigators and was on the loose. Detectives joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart to launch a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened by the news. He feared that Kelly might never be caught and could potentially harm him again. As the search for Kelly intensified, her phone went off, leading investigators to believe she was deliberately concealing her location. Kelly evaded police and fled to Wingo, Kentucky, over 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local authorities to exercise extreme caution if they found Kelly. Police in Wingo identified Kelly at her cousin's house on April 28. Understanding that she posed a potential danger and was prone to attempting to escape, officers rapidly proceeded to the residence, avoiding advance warnings that afternoon and detaining Kelly on site. During the interview, Kelly revealed new details. That Kelly was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to leave the city life behind to start over with him. On October 13, 2015, Jason discovered Kelly's infidelity. Jason made a dark pact. The adulterer was obliged to kill his lover if the affair was exposed. Kelly claimed she had never taken this pact seriously, thinking it was just a joke. However, Jason was resolute and warned Kelly that if she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, he would take matters into his own hands. Despite her reservations, Kelly reluctantly helped Jason commit a heinous crime. The next evening, October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house, eager to spend a romantic evening with Christopher while her husband was away. Kelly had planned a fun evening, complete with dinner and intimacy. Kelly and Christopher had dinner together and then went upstairs to the house. Then Jason suddenly appeared. Jason rushed into the bedroom, holding a rifle. Christopher immediately realized that he was in danger. Without hesitation, Jason shot Christopher in the head, killing him. Jason and Kelly then dragged the body down to the basement, where they began to dismember it with a hacksaw. Jason and Kelly cut Christopher's limbs and head off his body and placed the remains in several garbage bags. They then dumped the bags in the woods near Crystal Falls. To avoid suspicion, they drove Christopher's car away from the house. Kelly and Jason thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence of the crime. Kelly was consumed by a deep-seated anger towards her husband, whom she blamed for ruining her chance at happiness with he she truly loved, Christopher. She couldn't forgive her husband for depriving her of the opportunity to be with him, and the pain and loss she felt lingered every day. Kelly's resentment towards her husband eventually turned to hatred, and she knew she could no longer live peacefully with him. An opportunity for revenge presented itself on February 22, 2016, when her husband complained of back pain. Kelly convinced him to let her give her an injection, but she deliberately gave him a dose that killed him. However, the medication didn't work as planned, and her husband was still breathing. Kelly then suffocated him by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. To ensure he was dead, she also squeezed his neck, which explained the bruises found on his body. After confessing to the crime, Kelly cooperated with the police to help them locate Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team to a remote area near Crystal Falls to search for Christopher's body. A canine unit picked up the scent and led the team to a small hill, where they found a human skull with bullet holes, indicating a homicide. The team believed they had discovered Christopher's remains. Further examination of the scene yielded additional evidence, including a .22 caliber bullet, a broken firearm. Dental records later confirmed the victim's identity. This breakthrough finally solved the case that had haunted investigators for 2 years. Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher and Jason Cochran in April 2016. On February 13, 2017, Kelly was brought to court in Michigan to face charges. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind the crime and that she had planned and executed. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including Kelly's own confession, to support their case. However, Kelly told a different story. She claimed that her husband, Jason, was the one who had planned and committed the crime. According to Kelly, Jason was jealous and had been abusing her. On the day of the crime, Jason allegedly hid in the basement and surprised Kelly and Christopher, then shot Christopher in a fit of rage. Kelly also claimed that Jason had forced her to help him dismember the body by threatening to harm her. Despite Kelly's new version of events, the jury found her guilty of premeditated murder after deliberating for 3 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, Kelly Cochran was sent directly to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she is currently serving her sentence. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12th, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping, and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim: he had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors: she was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, an African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was matched, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder, in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. As the eldest of 3 children, Jessica took on significant responsibilities from a young age, helping her parents care for her 2 younger brothers while they worked. At age 15, Jessica started working part-time at a restaurant to save money to buy her first car, a red Pontiac. A few years later, she bought the car she wanted. Despite her job, Jessica excelled in school and began planning to attend college, where she hoped to study accounting. In the fall of 1999, 17-year-old Jessica was about to start her senior year of high school. She had also started dating a boy, which made her very happy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's parents went to work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. However, Jessica did not leave for school as planned. Later that day, around noon, Jessica's mother returned home from work and noticed something unusual. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. The mother went to Jessica's room, thinking that maybe she had overslept and missed school. But Jessica was not in her bedroom. The mother then considered the possibility that Jessica might have gotten a ride to school from her father, so she called him to ask. However, he told her that he had gone to work alone that morning. Jessica's mother suspected something was wrong with her car, so she took out a spare key to try to start the car. When she approached the car, the driver's door was slightly open, and Jessica's cell phone was lying on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, indicating that she had tried to call 911. Jessica's shoes and keys were found under the front seat, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back seat. Jessica's mother was worried about Jessica's safety. It was obvious that she had tried to call for help but was unsuccessful. Furthermore, Jessica could not leave her belongings in the car and leave. Jessica's parents contacted her school, learning that Jessica had not come to class that day. When Jessica's best friend at work called her parents a few hours later, saying that Jessica had not come to work, they became even more worried about Jessica. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the police, but the sheriff downplayed the situation, suggesting that Jessica might have wandered off and would return home on her own. Despite Jessica's parents' pleas, the sheriff refused to open an investigation. Undeterred, Jessica's parents contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had any information about Jessica's whereabouts. They then searched the entire town, scouring the area, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Jessica's parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that she had not returned home. The sheriff sent 2 officers to check Jessica's car. However, the officers searched the car without wearing gloves, potentially destroying evidence. Furthermore, the officers did not search Jessica's room. Feeling frustrated with the police, Jessica's parents sought the help of the local media, hoping to draw attention to Jessica's disappearance and the police's lack of attention. Jessica's family and friends, led by her father and Uncle Stanley, launched a search for Jessica. They also distributed flyers with information about Jessica. Fearing the worst, they focused their search on an area near a river, which was known to be a crime hub. For hours, Jessica's family members thoroughly searched the challenging terrain near the river but couldn't find any sign of Jessica. The next morning, Jessica's parents were at home and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, saying he had heard a faint cry for help that sounded exactly like his sister's voice. Jessica's father immediately grabbed his gun and ran outside to find the source of the screams. At the same time, his brother arrived and joined the search. They quickly noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, 40-year-old David Brooks. As they approached, they saw Brooks undressing on his property. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. This was not the only unusual behavior Brooks displayed. Before Jessica's disappearance, the 2 families had a normal relationship. However, soon after, he would drive slowly past their house, staring at them with an ominous smile. After seeing Brooks burning clothes on their property, Jessica's parents went back to the police, shared their concerns and asked them to come and meet Brooks with the dogs. The police agreed. The dogs were given some of Jessica's clothes to track her scent. They led the police to Brooks's fire pit, but no significant evidence was found. However, the dogs did find black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds that smelled like decomposition. During the search, no concrete evidence was found. Frustrated with the police, Jessica's father contacted the FBI for help. The FBI usually does not get involved in missing persons cases based on the family's request, but this time they decided to investigate immediately. After Jessica's parents presented the case and the family's findings, the FBI opened a full-scale investigation. The FBI proceeded to collect fingerprints from Jessica's room and her car, confiscating all potential evidence for further analysis. Additionally, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the area using helicopters and volunteers. They thoroughly examined the pond near Jessica's home. The FBI searched Brooks' farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. This discovery led the FBI to strongly suspect Brooks' involvement in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, although despite a thorough search, the FBI found no evidence. Due to lack of incriminating evidence, the investigation focused on searching the surrounding area. 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call on September 27th. A woman was driving along a road near the river. Noticing something unusual near a tree, the woman stopped to check and was horrified to see a body. She called the police immediately. When FBI agents arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who had suffered severe trauma. She was missing several fingers and toes. A rope tied around her leg showed traces of red and silver paint. Additionally, some of her clothing was missing, suggesting that she may have been sexually assaulted, leading the FBI to develop disturbing theories about the murder. Medical experts later confirmed the identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled. Her body also showed extensive bruising. Her limbs and fingers had been separated after death, suggesting that she was still alive when this happened. However, the most disturbing fact was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days after she went missing. This meant that the police had the opportunity to rescue her. But unfortunately, they did not take any action to do so. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who changed his story. He initially said he had seen Jessica near her home, but later said he had not seen her. His alibi was disputed by his wife, and he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed to trial. The FBI said the likelihood of a conviction was low due to a lack of concrete evidence. While they had some troubling clues that pointed to his involvement, they were circumstantial and inconclusive. As the trial progressed, detectives continued to search for additional evidence. During a re-examination of Brooks' car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie Jessica up. However, analysis showed no DNA on the rope. Brooks' trial began in January 2003. His attorney maintained his innocence, citing a lack of evidence. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators had found the victim's missing limbs but had not properly preserved them, causing them to decompose and lose potential evidence. The remaining circumstantial evidence was insufficient to convict, and the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in Brooks' acquittal. Under state law, he could only be brought back if new evidence was discovered. Jessica's parents were devastated by the outcome. The parents also felt that if the police had done their job properly, Jessica might still be alive. Over time, the case went cold and was largely abandoned, leaving the family without closure. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department and was tasked with reviewing unsolved cases. Lynn Hunt began by examining the murder case of Jessica. However, she was shocked to find that the original investigation was poorly handled, with case files containing errors and lacking key information from interviews with relevant parties. The evidence was also not properly documented, forcing Lynn Hunt to start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the crime. Hunt met with Jessica's family and obtained a box of her belongings that had been kept in her car at the time of the murder. One of her brothers, now an adult, had kept the box since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn Hunt was again disappointed by the careless handling of the evidence, as it had not been stored according to protocol. Her efforts paid off when she discovered a crucial document, Brooks' medical examination report, which revealed that Brooks had an IQ of 61, which is considered low. With a low IQ, Brooks may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. All of this led Lynn Hunt to think that this man might not have anything to do with the case. Lynn Hunt began to consider other suspects. Lynn Hunt conducted an extensive review of everyone connected to the case and those living in the surrounding area. This investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death. A coworker contacted Lynn Hunt with information about an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know who killed Jessica. Lynn Hunt initially dismissed the information as unreliable. Many inmates make up stories to get released early. However, Lynn Hunt verified the information before dismissing it. Lynn Hunt visited the prison and met a man who told her that he had previously shared a cell with another inmate. During conversations, the inmate revealed to him that he was responsible for the murder of Jessica Dishon. The informant revealed that Stanley Dishon, Jessica Dishon's uncle, had a dark secret. According to the informant, Stanley confessed to years of sexual abuse of Jessica while they lived under the same roof. He warned her that if she spoke about the abuse, he would kill her or someone she cared about. When Jessica started dating in the spring of 1999, Stanley became increasingly fearful that she might confide in her boyfriend about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. On September 10th, Stanley visited Jessica at her home when she was alone, and he saw her packing her belongings into her car. He approached her and asked her to end her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Jessica refused, threatening to expose Stanley's actions if he did not leave her alone. As Stanley threatened her, causing Jessica to reach for the phone to call 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but she broke free and ran back to her room. Stanley followed her into her room, striking her before binding her with her own sheets. Stanley then dragged her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley held Jessica captive for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before ultimately killing her. Stanley then placed her body in a visible location near the road and buried the bloody sheets under the shed. Additionally, Stanley removed some of Jessica's limbs in an attempt to mislead the police, making it seem like the murder was the work of drug traffickers. Lynn Hunt was intrigued to discover that this crucial detail about the missing limbs had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives were aware that her body had been mutilated, which meant the informant couldn't have fabricated this information. Furthermore, Stanley claimed to have buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Determined to verify the informant's story, Lynn Hunt decided to search for buried evidence. With limited resources at the local police department, she enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, keeping Stanley's possible guilt a secret. She did not report her suspected evidence to them. On the first day of the search, no clues were found despite searching the areas described by the informant. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn Hunt returned to the scene. On the way, they noticed an abandoned barn on the side of the road and decided to search. Inside the barn, they began digging. Their search uncovered a buried bed sheet. Lynn Hunt collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Since her disappearance, her parents had left her room unchanged, which helped in verifying the evidence. Upon comparison, Lynn Hunt confirmed that the bed sheet was indeed from Jessica's bedding, as it matched the pattern of the other linens and was missing from her bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and questioned by police. Although he appeared visibly shaken during questioning, he refused to confess to the crime. Stanley was eventually charged with murder and the case went to trial. This news shocked Jessica's father. The murderer he had been searching for was none other than his own brother Stanley Dishon. As the trial progressed, Lynn Hunt dug into Stanley's past to gather more evidence. She knew that he had assaulted Jessica, but her investigation uncovered that several of Stanley's female relatives had come forward to report that he had sexually abused them as children. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming he was temporarily homeless, and asked to stay at their home. However, when left alone with the young girls in their homes, Stanley would sexually assault them, threatening them to ensure their silence. Based on multiple similar accounts, police deduced that Stanley had been engaging in this behavior for approximately 3 decades. Lynn Hunt knew full well that a conviction for murder would be difficult, given the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, linking Stanley to the crime. Undeterred, Lynn Hunt continued her investigation and stumbled upon a box of old case files that had not been examined before. As she sifted through the boxes, Lynn Hunt was once again frustrated with the police who had originally handled the case. She noticed a letter dated June 26, 2002. A concerned person had written to the police at the time, recounting a story identical to one Lynn Hunt later heard from an inmate at the Kentucky Penitentiary. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. While in prison, he confided in a fellow inmate about killing his niece, Jessica. Unbeknownst to Stanley, his fellow inmate was a police informant who soon wrote a detailed letter to the police investigating the case, exposing the horrific events surrounding Jessica's death. However, police believed Brooks was the prime suspect at the time, causing them to ignore other potential leads. This inaction left Lynn Hunt deeply frustrated, becoming frustrated with the lack of professionalism of his colleagues. If the police had done their job properly, this case could have been solved in 2002. After all these years, Lynn Hunt could only hope that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions at the upcoming trial. The process began in 2015 when Stanley appeared in court, pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents were furious. The prosecution believed that a guilty verdict on the murder charges would be difficult due to a lack of evidence. There were also assault charges against other female family members. The prosecution would need these family members to testify in court, sharing explicit details about Stanley's actions against them. Given these challenges, the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, Stanley would have to plead guilty to both the assaults on his relatives and Jessica's murder. Ultimately, Stanley accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. Jessica's parents, who wanted the truth, were unhappy with this arrangement, but Stanley remained silent in accordance with the terms of the plea deal. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Since he was 56 years old at the time of his conviction, he could be released at age 71. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Angie Hausman. Angie Hausman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father had left the family before her birth, and as a result, she never had the opportunity to know him. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and was very close to her younger brother. Angie was a friendly and outgoing child who easily made friends with those around her. She lived with her family in a quiet suburban area of St. Louis. In 1993, at the age of 9, Angie attended the 4th grade at a local elementary school, which was just over a mile from her home. To get to school, she would take the bus from a nearby stop, and her parents felt relatively safe allowing her to travel alone due to the stop's proximity to their house. Angie usually walked to the bus stop with other neighborhood children, and after school, they would be watched over by several parents who would keep an eye on them from their windows as they made their way home. A tradition established in the neighborhood was that locals would watch over children and make sure they got home safely from the bus stop. On November 18th, Angie followed her usual routine and attended school, finishing at 3 p.m. She boarded the school bus with some neighborhood kids and got off at her stop. The other kids lived closer to the stop, so they walked ahead, leaving Angie to walk the remaining short distance home alone. However, Angie failed to arrive home, which was unusual. Her parents started to worry about half an hour later. They decided to walk along Angie's usual route from their house to the bus stop to see if they could find her. During their search, they spoke with other kids from Angie's school. They confirmed that she had gotten off the bus with them and was walking toward her home. Her parents also talked to neighbors who usually kept an eye on the kids but were busy that day and didn't see anything. Angie's parents and their friends combed the area but couldn't find her. As night began to fall, Angie's parents decided to call the police for assistance. Police officers quickly joined the search for Angie. The cold weather made it unlikely that she would have wandered off on her own, so they initially focused on the possibility of something more serious happening to her. A recent kidnapping in the neighborhood, involving an 11-year-old girl just 10 days earlier, further heightened their concerns. The man had approached the girl as she got off the school bus and tried to drag her into the bushes, but she managed to escape. Since the man was still at large, the police considered the possibility that he might be involved in Angie's disappearance. The police brought in dogs trained to track scents, and the dogs picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop. The dogs followed the scent for about half the distance to Angie's house, but then lost it. This suggested that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle at that point, which made the police think that she might have been abducted. The police also used helicopters with special sensors to search the area and looked along the banks of a small stream near Angie's home, but they did not find Angie or any of her belongings. The first day of the search for Angie yielded no results, prompting the police to reach out to the media for assistance. As a result, news of her disappearance spread rapidly throughout the city, generating over 300 calls to the police department within 24 hours. More than 20 additional officers were brought in to help handle the large number of new leads in the case. Despite this effort, none of the leads led to Angie's discovery. Detectives explored every possible scenario, and from the early stages of the investigation, they began to scrutinize Angie's stepfather. He denied any involvement in her disappearance and claimed he would never harm her. To clear his name, he agreed to a polygraph test and other checks, urging the police to focus on finding Angie rather than wasting time on him. The investigation also led to the discovery of Angie's biological father, who had never had any direct contact with his daughter. However, her mother reported that he had been seen driving past their house on multiple occasions, watching Angie play outside. Although this behavior raised suspicions among detectives, the man had a solid alibi that checked out. On the third day of Angie's disappearance, the FBI stepped in to assist the police department, which then allocated even more officers to the case. Everyone realized that something awful must have occurred to Angie, as it was unlikely she could have survived on her own in the freezing weather. A new lead emerged. Someone reported a suspicious man driving a blue sedan slowly through Angie's neighborhood. The description of this man matched the one given by a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction attempt just 10 days before Angie vanished. The police created a composite sketch of the suspect and featured it in the news. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers with the sketch. But the man's identity remained a mystery. As the case gained national attention, it was covered on television, attracting even more leads. The police carefully examined each new lead, but none of them led to Angie's discovery. The case also drew in psychics. They began calling Angie's home to share their alleged visions. One psychic claimed that Angie was alive and even provided a specific location where she being held, a large national park 25 miles from her home. However, the detectives did not give any credence to these claims. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information about Angie's disappearance, which led to a large number of tips being submitted. During the investigation, detectives discovered a concerning detail. Angie had told her teacher a few days before she vanished that she planned to go on a nature trip with her uncle. However, Angie's parents were unaware of any uncle, and it seemed Angie had fabricated this story. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor beforehand and referred to them as her uncle. Unfortunately, the conversation with her teacher did not provide any information about this mysterious individual. The investigation stalled, with no progress made in the following days. On November 27th, 9 days after Angie's disappearance, an important development in the case was found. A hunter contacted the police, reported that he found a body in the woods of a national park. Upon arriving at the scene, police were met with a disturbing sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, with her head completely wrapped in tape except for her nose. Her hands were also bound with handcuffs. Near where the body was found, they found a bag containing personal items, which were quickly identified as Angie's remains. Among the belongings were notebooks with her name. After being transferred to the medical examiner, a detailed examination of the body revealed additional shocking facts. The removal of tape from her head uncovered a piece of underwear lodged in her mouth. The autopsy results indicated that Angie's death had occurred only a few hours before the body was discovered. This suggested she was held captive for 9 days, only to be left to freeze to death at the scene. Experts further determined that Angie suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted during her ordeal. Forensic analysts carefully inspected every proof collected from the crime scene and identified a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They cross-referenced this evidence against potential suspects in their database, but unfortunately, this led to no new leads. The discovery of the body accelerated the police investigation, prompting the allocation of additional resources to help solve the case. The community was shocked by the extreme brutality of the crime and was deeply concerned for their children's safety, with many escorting their kids to bus stops and keeping a close watch over them at all times. A few days after Angie's discovery, concerns escalated further. On December 1st, 10-year-old Cassidy went missing from a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's home. Cassidy asked her mother for permission to visit friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but then she disappeared. Cassidy's disappearance sparked an extensive police investigation, and detectives began to suspect the possibility that Cassidy's case might be linked to a serial killer. Although they considered the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, they lacked concrete evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Cassidy's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain. The cause of death was severe head injuries. Despite efforts, detectives couldn't find any leads to the killer. Furthermore, they started questioning whether the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Cassidy's deaths. Detectives suspected they might be dealing with two different killers due to the distinct characteristics of the crimes. Around the same time, they identified a 37-year-old man named Gary as a potential suspect. Gary had previously attempted to abduct a girl just before Angie went missing and regularly traveled to St. Louis for work. The man was initially investigated for potential involvement in the murders of Angie and Cassidy, but he had an alibi for the time of their disappearances. Although he was not connected to these crimes, he did admit to assaulting 4 other girls and was subsequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. In February of the following year, a significant development in the case was revealed when detectives finally found Cassidy's body. Nearby, they found tire tracks that were identified as coming from a pickup truck model frequently used by a prominent car rental company. The distinctive vehicles were easily recognizable due to their vibrant brand logos. With this new information, detectives interviewed residents in Cassidy's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen one of these pickup trucks. One woman reported seeing a vehicle from the car rental company near her neighbor's house about a week after Cassidy's disappearance. Police found a woman who lived with her husband and brother at the house they were investigating. When questioned, the woman claimed neither she nor her husband, brother had rented the pickup associated with the crime, and they had no involvement in the case. However, detectives were skeptical of her claims and obtained a search warrant for the house. Upon searching the house, investigators found blood traces from the victim, Cassidy, in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, was the one who had rented the pickup in question. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement but eventually confessed when confronted with the evidence. According to Thomas's confession, Cassidy had come to his door, wanting to invite his nephews out to play. He invited her into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Cassidy screamed, Thomas struck her with a heavy object and then covered her body with bed sheets. After committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, his sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement. She made it clear that she didn't want to know the details of what happened and insisted that the body be disposed of immediately. Cassidy's body remained in the basement for a week due to ongoing searches, and Thomas was too afraid to move it. Once things had calmed down, he rented a pickup truck and took the body to St. Louis. He hid her body there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes but died in prison several years later due to illness. Despite being questioned about Angie's case, he maintained his innocence, leading detectives to conclude that the crimes were unrelated. The investigation stalled for many months with few leads coming in. Years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge when the reward for information was set to expire, sparking concerns that the public would stop providing tips and assistance in the case. However, in 2001, a local businessman donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This large sum of money caused a spike in many information to the police. But unfortunately, there are no clues to help solve the case. In 2001, a new development emerged in the Angie Houseman case when Corey Fox, an inmate, turned himself in and confessed to multiple murders, including the murder of Angie Houseman. Corey Fox provided detailed information about Angie's abduction and captivity, including being tied to a tree, with her underwear used as a gag. However, upon further questioning, detectives found inconsistencies in his confession, such as incorrectly stating that Angie's hands were restrained with plastic handcuffs instead of iron ones. Further investigation revealed that Corey Fox also fabricated parts of his confession, possibly due to extensive media coverage of Angie's case. Another tragic case happened in 2002, the abduction and murder of a 6-year-old girl, briefly sparked renewed interest in Angie's case. However, it was soon determined that the two cases were unrelated. The perpetrator in the 2002 case was a neighbor. He quickly confessed during interrogation, while Angie's case remained unsolved. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives reopened the case in 2007. They re-examined the documents and found a peculiar detail. A man named Roger Martin was in a parked car near the crime scene when Angie's body was discovered. When questioned, Roger claimed he was in the area for hunting, but a search of his car found no hunting gear. Further investigation revealed that Roger had a criminal record involving children, including an assault near the location where Angie's body was found. These crimes occurred before Angie's death, but the police had not thoroughly investigated Roger at the time. The new detective team called Roger in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, claiming he was in the area by chance. Roger stated that he was still at work when Angie's body was left at the crime scene. The investigation stalled after a 9-hour interrogation of Roger failed to yield results. Although his fingerprints were taken and compared to those on the tape from Angie's head, no match was found, leading to his release due to insufficient evidence. The case remained stagnant until 2018 when the St. Louis Police Department established a dedicated task force to re-examine the evidence using advanced technology. The team focused on 3 crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and the underwear used to silence her. Despite previous failed attempts to find the perpetrator's DNA on these items, the detectives were determined to try again. They began by re-examining the handcuffs but encountered difficulties due to the presence of Angie's blood. They then turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head but discovered it had deteriorated over time, meaningless their efforts. The investigators examined the underwear as a last resort, despite low expectations due to it being in Angie's mouth for several hours, which could have erased any foreign DNA. Using advanced technology, they thoroughly inspected every inch of the underwear and eventually found a tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA, sufficient for analysis. The DNA was confirmed to belong to a male and was immediately uploaded to the FBI database. In cases like this, it's common for the DNA not to match anyone in the database, requiring further efforts to identify the person. However, in this instance, the detectives got lucky. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox was not on police radar in connection with Angie's case, but he had a significant criminal record. His first stint in prison was in 1982, during his military service in Germany, where he worked as a part-time babysitter. However, his babysitting job ended when 4 girls accused him of sexual assault. Cox initially received an 8-year prison sentence in the United States but was released after serving only 3 years. Following his release, he relocated to St. Louis. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was arrested again 4 years later when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but he violated his parole, resulting in an additional year in prison. After his release in 1992, Cox moved to St. Louis to live with his relatives. The following year, he allegedly abducted and murdered Angie. In 2002, Cox was arrested again, this time for operating a major online platform where users shared child abuse materials. The FBI had been investigating the platform and caught Cox in a sting operation when he attempted to meet an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl. Cox had planned to make the girl his slave and had sent her money for a bus ticket. However, when he arrived at the meeting place, he was met by armed FBI agents and arrested. A search of his computer revealed over 45,000 images of child abuse, as well as evidence that he was the mastermind behind the online platform. This led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the largest operations against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his term ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep him detained, citing him as a serious threat to children. He remained in prison until 2019, when his DNA sample matched the DNA sample from Angie's case. Detectives visited Cox in prison to discuss the match, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Given the strong DNA evidence against him, the police knew Cox's chances of winning in court were slim. Instead of pursuing a trial, investigators contacted Earl's lawyer with a proposal. In exchange for Cox's confession to Angie's murder, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and seek a life sentence instead. Aware of the strong evidence against him, Cox agreed to the deal. detectives returned to the prison to hear Cox's account of the events. Although some parts of his story seemed unlikely, the crucial aspect for investigators was his admission to the murder. Cox claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving near his mother's and sister's neighborhood when his car broke down in the middle of the road. When he tried to examine the car, a school bus stopped, and several children got off. The children went into their homes, except for one girl, Angie. According to Cox, Angie approached him, and they briefly talked. He noticed she was cold, so he offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Cox then took Angie to Burger King to eat and later brought her to his home, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted her over several days. Eventually, Cox decided to get rid of Angie, taking her to the location where her body would later be found. He tied her to a tree, claiming she was still alive at that moment. Detectives were skeptical about certain parts of Cox's story. Angie was unlikely to get into a car with a stranger, given the short distance to her home. The investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Cox's story. He claimed the car stalled, but it started again when Angie approached. It's more likely that the perpetrator targeted Angie and decided to abduct her. This hypothesis seems more plausible than Cox's account. The detectives got what they needed, a confession to the murder. In August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A judge handed down the sentence. Unfortunately, Angie's mother didn't live to see justice served. She died of cancer in 2016. Angie's father, Ronald, told reporters that Cox was responsible for his wife's death and should have been tried for 2 murders. A woman's life was forever changed after the loss of her daughter. She lost all interest in life and eventually passed away. Cox's story, however, took a different turn. The prosecutor reopened a case involving the sexual abuse of 2 7-year-old girls, for which Cox had previously received a lenient sentence of 1 year in prison for violating his parole. The police reached out to one of Cox's victims, now an adult, and asked her to testify against him. Cox ultimately admitted to his crimes and was given an additional 10 years prison sentence. In court, his victim spoke out, saying that despite Cox's terrible actions, but she would go on to live a happy and fulfilling life, while Cox would spend the rest of his life in prison. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamon Springs, Florida. She grew up in a happy family with an older brother, a younger sister, and loving parents. Her father traveled frequently for work in several states, so he was not always home. As a child, Jessica was active and cheerful. She enjoyed spending time outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when she was 9 years old, her family decided to visit her grandparents for Easter. That morning, her father left the house to do some shopping, while her mother stayed behind to clean up and prepare for the trip. After school, Jessica came home and asked her mother if she could go out to play in the apartment complex. The area was relatively safe because it was far from the main road and had many trees around. Her mother agreed but asked Jessica to play only in the yard. A few hours later, around 6 p.m., Jessica's father returned home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was surprised because her daughter was supposed to be in the yard waiting for her father, but he insisted that she was not there. The parents went outside and searched the yard but did not find Jessica. Feeling worried, they decided to ask the neighbors in the hope that someone had seen their daughter. One neighbor said that he had seen Jessica in the front yard, sitting on the couch reading a book. But that did not help in finding Jessica, When darkness fell and their daughter was still missing, they decided to call the police. The police arrived a few minutes later and began searching and interviewing the neighbors. Despite their efforts, they could not find Jessica, so they expanded the search area to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police station received an unexpected call. The caller's voice was drowned out by loud noise, but the operator could still hear it. The caller revealed that the police would find the missing girl near a water pump station a few miles from her home. The police rushed to the pump station to check on the caller's instructions and witnessed a heartbreaking scene. Before them was the body of a girl lying near the station, hidden in a black trash bag. Just a few meters from the road, the pump station was under a bridge and could not be seen. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and turned her body over to the medical examiner. Meanwhile, investigators focused on finding the person who made the 911 call and reported the news, as they believed the call came from the killer. But there was a challenge. The call was made from a public phone at a gas station less than a mile from the crime scene, and by the time the police arrived, the perpetrator was gone. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but it was quite a challenge. A public phone could have many fingerprints. Furthermore, investigators realized that the criminal could have wiped the phone after making the call or used gloves. Experts concluded that Jessica was killed elsewhere and her body was moved to the water pump station. Marks on the ground in front of the pump station suggested that the killer could have dragged Jessica's body from a car and dragged it across the ground. Jessica's clothes were intact except for one shoe. Police could not find it in her pocket or in the surrounding area. The only clue found at the crime scene was tire marks on the ground. Police could not be sure that they belonged to the killer's car, but they took pictures of them. Medical experts performed an autopsy and determined that Jessica died from strangulation based on marks on her face and neck. It appeared that the killer did it with his bare hands. A hamburger was also found in her stomach, consumed less than an hour before her death. Her mother said she had not given Jessica anything of the sort that day, leading police to believe the food had been provided to her by the killer. Experts also found no signs of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unclear. Police initially suspected Jessica's parents because neither had a solid alibi for the time of her disappearance. Jessica's mother claimed that she was packing her belongings in the apartment, while her father went shopping. However, both had the opportunity to commit the crime, theoretically. Police were trying to figure out how the killer had taken Jessica out of the complex's courtyard without anyone noticing or without her calling for help. This led them to suspect that the killer may have known the victim and that she had left voluntarily. Another factor that supported this theory was the killer's tone during the 911 call. Although experts tried to erase the recording, they still noticed sadness and regret in the killer's voice, as if he truly regretted his actions. The killer's actions when calling 911 spoke volumes. It is possible that the killer did this for the thrill of toying with the police and manipulating the investigation, or that he truly regretted his actions and wanted to somehow alleviate that feeling. However, upon closer examination, investigators are inclined to the second option: that the killer truly regretted his actions. The police checked Jessica's father's car and found an important detail in the trunk. It was a roll of black garbage bags similar to the one in which the victim's body was found. However, after analysis, experts determined that this bag was not similar to the other bags in the father's car. Therefore, Jessica's father was eliminated as a suspect and investigators turned their attention to other people. Forensic experts studied the victim's clothes and body for clues. They found several important traces. There was a large amount of dog hair on the victim's body, which was very strange because Jessica's family did not own dogs. This suggested that the dog might belong to the killer. They also found human hair on the girl's body, which belonged to an unidentified white male. However, it took experts a few days to extract the man's DNA profile. 2 types of strange fibers were also found on the victim's clothing. After analysis, experts concluded that one type of fiber could have come from the car seat cover and the other from the carpet. This further supported the theory that the victim had been killed elsewhere and taken to the water station by car. Experts attempted to identify the breed of the dog from the hairs on Jessica's clothing using an FBI database. This database contains microscopic photographs of hairs from many different dog breeds and has proven useful in criminal cases. The process of identifying the breed of the dog is done by comparing the hairs to samples from the database and eliminating each breed one by one. They eventually concluded that the hair on the victim's clothes came from a Shar-Pei. This suggested that the killer may have owned such a dog and that the hair had gotten on Jessica's clothes while she was in the killer's car or at their home. Investigators developed a preliminary theory that the killer may have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to McDonald's for a hamburger, then taken her home and killed her. Meanwhile, experts were also trying to improve the phone call recording. However, this was a challenging task. To solve this problem, detectives sought help from NASA. NASA has advanced tools for improving recordings, originally designed to improve recordings from space. They agreed to help and provided the police with a higher quality recording. Experts needed a voice sample from the suspect to compare with the call recording and determine a match. Because detectives suspected that the killer might know Jessica, they decided to play the recording of the call to her mother. Jessica's mother listened to the recording and said that the voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't remember who it belonged to. However, after listening to the recording a second time, Jessica's mother recognized the voice as that of a neighbor who lived in the same complex. She added information to detectives that the man often walked a Shar-Pei in the yard. Police quickly identified the man as James Crow, 35. During the initial investigation, investigators interviewed him along with other neighbors. He said that he saw Jessica in the yard while walking her dog. They talked for a while, and then he left. Detectives looked into his background and discovered that James had no criminal record. He lives with his wife, a nurse, and is currently unemployed, spending most of his time walking the streets with a Shar-Pei named Pumpkin. The detectives realized that James's voice and the fact that he owned a dog of the same breed were not enough to arrest him. So they obtained a search warrant for his car. During the search, they discovered 2 troubling clues. Under the front passenger seat, they found an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious since Jessica had eaten a hamburger. Experts also noticed that his car had brand new tires, as if they had barely been used. The police discovered that James had replaced the tires on the day of Jessica's murder, even though his previous tires were not very old and could have lasted for several more years. James claimed to have left the old tires at a car repair shop, which was unusual since they were not old at all. The police went to the service center to investigate. When they arrived, only one of James's tires was left. They compared its tread pattern to those found near the body. However, the results showed that they did not match. Detectives were not 100% certain that the tire tracks on the ground were left by the killer's car, as it was possible that the tire tracks were from a maintenance vehicle that regularly visited the area. Police searched James's apartment and found a box containing rolls of trash bags that matched the bags found on the victim's body. Although not direct evidence, detectives decided to investigate whether there was any way to determine if the bags collected at the scene and at James's home came from the same manufacturer. However, identifying these bags was difficult because they had no distinct markings, and there were hundreds of similar manufacturers. To address this challenge, detectives contacted Roberts, who was in charge of quality control at a bag manufacturing company. Roberts was able to identify the factory that produced the bags found in James's apartment through the code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. This product was manufactured at a facility in Virginia. Experts discovered that small amounts of iron or titanium were present in the bag's composition depending on their color. Since the materials are constantly changing during the manufacturing process, the ratio of plastic to iron or titanium actually changes daily. Detectives decided to take bags from James's apartment and the crime scene to measure the ratio of elements in the plastic using high-intensity X-rays. This gave them a very accurate ratio. Careful analysis showed that the ratio of iron to titanium in both plastic bags was the same, which suggested that they were manufactured on the same day and even in the same batch. The process of manufacturing garbage bags often leaves a small amount of microscopic debris on the machine, which is normal. However, when the plastic sheets are cut into bags, this debris forms small streaks that can be seen with the naked eye. Each roll of bags will have a unique pattern made up of these streaks. The pattern on each bag was created by particles of debris moving down the conveyor belt, which were then replaced by new particles. As a result, the same pattern would be retained over several hundred feet of fabric. This suggests that the two bags were not only produced in the same batch but also within a few hours of each other. When comparing the bags from the suspect's apartment in the crime scene, experts found that the lines on them matched remarkably well. Furthermore, after production, the bags were rolled into a bundle by a machine, but the machine often did this unevenly. Without close observation, these deviations were barely noticeable, making the rolls appear smooth. When examining the edges of the bags, there were small folds and wrinkles that formed a unique pattern similar to streaks. Experts compared and found that the pattern on the bags from James's apartment matched exactly the pattern on the bags at the crime scene. This meant that with a high probability, the bag from the crime scene had been taken from James' apartment. In addition, forensic analysts compared fibers found on Jessica's clothing with those from the carpet in James' apartment and the seat cover of his car. The results showed that both samples matched. Furthermore, an audio expert compared the recording of the 911 call with James' voice sample and concluded that they matched. Although the experts had collected a significant amount of evidence, the detectives still faced the major problem that all the evidence collected was circumstantial. However, the police were confident of James's involvement in Jessica's murder and decided to arrest him. Since James continued to deny his guilt, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented their report on how the crime occurred. James spent a lot of time outside with his dog, and all the local kids knew him well. They often played with Pumpkin, James' dog, and therefore, they trusted him. Jessica was no exception, and this trust may have led to her becoming a victim. The police provided an explanation of what happened on the day Jessica went missing. At that time, James was walking his dog and saw her sitting alone on a bench. He approached her, started chatting, and then invited her to McDonald's to buy her a hamburger. Jessica knew James quite well, so she agreed. According to the police, on that day, James noticed Jessica sitting alone on a bench while he was walking his dog and started chatting with her. He offered to take her to McDonald's, promising to buy her a hamburger, and Jessica agreed because she knew him well. After eating at the restaurant, he may have taken her back to the apartment complex and invited her to his home. He may have asked her to play with Pumpkin. The presence of carpet fibers from his living room on Jessica's clothes suggests she was there on the day of her death. According to the investigation, James may have intended to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Based on the autopsy results, the perpetrator not only strangled her with his bare hands but also pressed his palms against her face. This may be evidence that she tried to scream, causing the perpetrator to panic and attack. After Jessica's death, James placed her body in a garbage bag and put it in his car to transport it to a disposal site without arousing suspicion. James drove a few miles to a nearby water station, where he left Jessica's body. He then returned to his house, perhaps after stopping at a gas station to make a phone call. During the preliminary hearing, James' attorneys attempted to dismiss all available evidence, arguing that there was no solid evidence to prove their client's guilt. However, in capital cases, the standard of proof is much higher. In James's case, he had a very good chance of avoiding the death penalty. Based on these facts, a plea deal was proposed to James. Under the deal, James would admit to second-degree murder and receive a 40-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. In the summer of 1998, 2 years after the murder, James agreed to the deal. Although he was not required to disclose details of the crime, James mentioned that part of his decision was to spare Jessica's family the long ordeal of a trial. The prosecution believed James had shown remorse, as demonstrated by his 911 call. However, the purpose of this call remains unclear. The only plausible explanation is that James genuinely wanted to reduce his guilt for such a serious crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy with the deal because they wanted their daughter's killer to receive the death penalty. They were also disappointed that James refused to confess to the crime. What was even more disappointing was that James did not serve his entire prison sentence due to poor health. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49, taking the secret of Jessica's murder with him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Information about her family and childhood is limited. She grew up in the Cuban with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. From a young age, Samadi attended a local school and showed a complex personality. Samadi stood out for her beauty and knew how to take advantage of her appearance. However, due to her ambition and vanity, she put material and personal interests first, disappointing many people. She was also very jealous and aggressive when she was young. Thanks to her doll-like appearance, Samadi Fonseca worked for many years as a Barbie in a large bookstore of the Universal Company. The nickname Barbie stuck with her ever since. After graduating from high school, Samadi began a relationship with Osvaldo Fernando Belier, a successful journalist working for a local television station. Osvaldo was 16 years older than Samadi. This was Samadi's longest and most serious relationship, but Osvaldo never proposed to her. In 1996, they had a son, Christopher, and a year later, a daughter, Christina, was born. Due to scandals and jealousy, Samadi and Osvaldo divorced in 2012. In 2013, Osvaldo died at the age of 53 without leaving a will for Samadi. Not accepting this, Samadi decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to Osvaldo's old house, occupied it, and changed the locks to prevent his family and heirs from entering. In addition to seizing the property, Samadi also took some of Osvaldo's valuables. Osvaldo's family was extremely angry and immediately sued Samadi for theft. The police forced Samadi to leave the house, but no criminal proceedings were initiated against her. Samadi had several relationships, most notably with Miguel Angel Perez, with whom she had a third daughter, Maria. Some sources claim that they were married but divorced after a few years. However, other sources claim that Samadi was not married, but simply gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his consent. Many strange events have been discovered. Some Barbie lovers have gone missing or died under mysterious circumstances. However, this has not been noticed for a long time. For example, one of Samadi's lovers went missing after breaking up with her. To this day, this person has not been found. Many suspect Samadi's involvement, but there is no concrete evidence. Another case is Diaco, also Samadi's former lover. He was murdered after breaking up with her. The case looked like a failed robbery. The perpetrator was never caught. Again, people suspected Samadhi was involved, but there was no clear evidence. The most famous victim believed to be linked to Samadhi was Gerardo Cruz. Gerardo Cruz, a Costa Rican native, was born in December 1992 in San Jose. He did not know his biological father because he left the family before he was born. Gerardo's mother, Ana Patricia, later married a man named Hermes Rodriguez. Hermes adopted Gerardo and loved him as his own son. A few years later, Gerardo had a younger sister named Milena. His childhood and youth were quite peaceful. He attended a normal school, loved motorbikes, and soon found true love with a girl named Carol. At the age of 23, Gerardo, his wife and 4-year-old daughter Genesis Cruz moved to live with his aunt and uncle in the suburbs of San Sebastian. He worked at a local bakery to support his family. Gerardo and Carol was happy and were expecting a second child. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samadhi, a regular customer at the bakery. Samadhi was 40 years old but still attractive, liked to dress provocatively and flirt with men. Notably, she started having affairs with much younger men, probably because she enjoyed the attention they received. Despite the age difference of nearly 20 years, Gerardo quickly became infatuated with this beautiful woman and began dating her secretly. She often came to the bakery, almost every day, to meet her young lover, attracting the attention of other employees. Samadhi was often accompanied by his eldest daughter Christina, who was 19 at the time. Initially, Gerardo skillfully balanced his family life with his secret meetings with his mistress. Both women were unaware of each other's existence. However, Gerardo gradually became careless and began telling his friends and colleagues about Samadhi, praising her as a great mistress and giving him gifts. Rumors of Gerardo's relationship soon reached his mother, who tried to convince her son to leave his mistress. However, Gerardo and Samadhi's relationship only lasted a few months and ended in October 2015, when Samadhi discovered that Gerardo had a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Samadhi was furious and began calling and texting Gerardo's wife, Carol, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo if he did not stay with her. Gerardo begged his wife for forgiveness and wanted to keep the family together. He did not take Samadhi's threats seriously, thinking that she would quickly cool down and find a new boyfriend. He did not expect how vengeful Samadhi would become. Just a few days after the breakup with Samadhi, while walking on a downtown street, Gerardo discovered an older man secretly filming up a young woman's skirt. Gerardo was angry and decided to record the incident with his phone. He then approached the woman, explained the situation and advised her to call the police. Next, he chased the man for about 2 minutes, trying to capture his face. Finally, the man fled in a taxi. That evening, Gerardo posted a video of the incident on his personal website. After just one night, the video went viral online. Netizens quickly identified the elderly man in the video as Luis Solmano Delgado, a former finance ministry official. The video quickly spread across media, turning Gerardo into a national celebrity. He was repeatedly invited to interviews in newspapers, on television and on radio to recount the incident, condemn the former official's actions and affirm that he had no regrets about what he had done. Meanwhile, a team of talented lawyers hired by Luis began to legally attack Gerardo. They accused him of violating the law by distributing the video and were preparing to sue him. Gerardo was surprised and confused by the situation, not knowing why he was being tried instead of the man who had committed a depraved act with an innocent girl. On October 7th, Gerardo gave his final interview on a local radio station. He was confident in his views and did not feel nervous. The next day, Gerardo planned to meet his friend Oswald after work, but canceled, citing an emergency. It was later revealed that Gerardo had received a text message from Samadhi that day. In the message, she had lured him to the park that evening with the promise of another interview. Gerardo trusted his ex-girlfriend completely and did not suspect anything. After work, he went to the meeting place, but instead of meeting the journalist, he was attacked by two strange men. They robbed him of his bag, beat him and stabbed him several times in the chest and stomach before running away. Before losing consciousness, Gerardo called his friend to tell him the news. The friend immediately called the police and an ambulance. Thanks to timely treatment, Gerardo was taken to the hospital. Doctors tried to save his life for 42 days. During this time, Gerardo underwent many surgeries, but ultimately did not survive. On November 19, Gerardo passed away in the intensive care unit. Since Gerardo had just become famous before the tragedy, the news of his condition attracted national attention and was not exaggerated. Gerardo's family gave interviews, asking people to pray for his recovery. They did not understand why someone would attack Gerardo. Many people attended the funeral to express their condolences to the family. People hoped that the police would soon catch the culprit and give him a fair trial. There were initially many theories about the case. One theory was that it was a robbery-murder, because Gerardo was attacked in the park in the evening, his bag was stolen and he was stabbed with a knife. However, a few days before, Gerardo released a shocking video involving a famous former official, which could be related to the case. Therefore, the second theory was that it was a revenge murder. The media reported that Luis Solmano Delgado may have hired a hitman to kill the young man who had damaged his reputation. The case caused a heated debate in the press and people protested to demand the arrest of the culprit. The police began to investigate various theories and look for Gerardo's enemies. The investigation went dormant for months until May 2016, when a security camera video was discovered. The video showed two men running away from the crime scene. They immediately became prime suspects, but the police needed to identify and arrest them. The video became crucial evidence and, when released, helped move the investigation forward. The video was repeatedly shown on the news, urging viewers to look out for dangerous suspects. Police sketched the suspects and their physical features. Not long after, one suspect turned himself in and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a reduced sentence. Thanks to his information, the investigation quickly identified other accomplices and the masterminds. All those involved were arrested, including Samadi and his daughter Cristina, the masterminds, Ronald Arce Barrientos, the taxi driver, Cesar Chavez Cerdas, who acted as an intermediary, Omar Costa, the young miner who directly participated in the attack and followed the victim. The roles and connections of the participants in the case were determined through phone calls and text messages. Samadi was the mastermind, who planned the entire incident in detail and recruited his daughter Cristina to participate. They asked their friends Ronald and Cesar to find an assassin to kill Gerardo, disguising it as a robbery in the park at night. Omar also participated with the task of ensuring that the victim arrived at the right location. Samadi chose October 7th as the date of the murder. On that day, she contacted all the participants several times, assigning roles and ensuring that everyone followed the plan. The young woman also asked them to bring her some of her ex-lover's belongings as evidence after the crime. Gerardo, after finishing his shift, went straight to the park. He thought he was going to an interview, so he tried to arrive on time. However, at the meeting place, he was attacked and stabbed multiple times. The attacker took Gerardo's handbag and jacket, then gave these to the Samadi as evidence. The most important evidence against Samadi were text messages detailing the murder plan and the roles of each participant. She was so confident that she did not delete these messages. The motive for this serious crime was jealousy. She did not want to share her lover with his wife and decided that if she could not have him, no one could. She carefully planned and executed the criminal conspiracy with the help of her daughter. They were immediately arrested and denied bail due to concerns that they might flee the country. The other co-defendants were also detained before trial, except for Omar, the supervisor, and the youngest participant was handed over to the Juvenile Justice Department. The investigation lasted about a year and a half. It was not until December 2017 that the trial of all those involved in the criminal conspiracy began. Samadi has a criminal record and was once arrested for falsifying documents to receive state benefits, but was only fined. She assigned the surname of a former lover to the child without his consent. She then used the court to receive child support from this man for more than 3 years, until the fraud was discovered. Samadi was sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined a large sum. However, because she has a young child, her sentence was reduced to 5 years of suspended imprisonment. At the trial, the victim Gerardo's wife confirmed that she knew about her husband's relationship with Samadi. She also said that Samadi had threatened to kill Gerardo, but he was not too worried about these threats. The main motive for the case was Samadi's jealousy and hurt, as she could not accept that her young lover wanted to stay with his wife. Through phone records, police discovered that Samadi and her daughter Christina had planned the crime together. After the security camera footage of the murders was released, Christina had a mental breakdown. She called her mother in tears and wanted to turn herself in, but Samadi reassured her that the investigation would never lead to them. The verdict was announced on January 23, 2018. The court sentenced Samadi to 30 years in prison, Christina to 25 years, Ronald to 25 years, and Caesar to 25 years. Of the killers, one was sent to a juvenile detention center, while another was still at large at the time. Omar, who had been stalking the victim, was acquitted. The victim's family received $140,000 in moral compensation. After the trial, they expressed their gratitude to the court for giving Gerardo's killers a fair sentence. Samadi and Christina's lawyers appealed to the Court of Appeals for a reduced sentence. The appeal hearing took place in November 2019. At the same time, Ronald. According to the testimony, Ronald participated in the massacre but did not know the details of the plan. Ronald and Caesar also appealed in hopes of having their sentences reduced. As a result, each participant in the crime had their sentence reduced by 5 years. Samadi is currently serving a 25-year sentence in a women's prison in Costa Rica. In the summer of 2020, she registered her marriage to a woman named Lindsay Diaz Lopez, whom she met in prison. At the time of the registration, Lindsay had been pardoned and released from prison, while Samadi still had to continue serving nearly 2 more decades of her sentence. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Daniel Wozniak. Costa Mesa, California, is located between Los Angeles and San Diego on a coastal plateau overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Despite being an affluent area, it still retains the laid-back atmosphere of a beach town. No one expected this picturesque location to be the site of Julie Kibushi's tragic fate. Sam Har's parents, Stephen and Raquel, were worried when they realized they hadn't heard from him in a while. Sam was scheduled to visit them that weekend, but he never arrived. On May 22, 2010, his parents Stephen and Raquel went to Sam's apartment. When they arrived, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Stephen, in a panic, quickly called 911. During the call, he informed the police that there was a dead woman lying face down in his son's bedroom, her clothes partially torn and blood dripping from her forehead. "Do you know where your son is?" the dispatcher asked. "No, I don't," came the reply. But there was no sign of Sam anywhere. The case shocked the Costa Mesa community, where homicides are extremely rare. When police arrived at the apartment, they found no evidence of a struggle. The apartment was neat and showed no signs of a struggle. The space contained typical bachelor items like empty beer bottles, used cigarettes, and an outdoor grill, all of which were relatively clean and tidy. Until they entered the bedroom. In the bedroom, police found an unused knife on the nightstand and several books, including a fighting manual and another titled The Wonders of Sex. The most alarming discovery, however, was on the bed. It was covered in the victim's blood. The dead woman was lying partly on the bed and partly on the floor, her pants down, exposing her lower body. Police believe she may have been sexually assaulted before her death. She died of 2 gunshot wounds to the head, one to the top of her head. Although there was a knife on the nightstand, it did not appear to have been used. Curiously, she was wearing a crown, and the back of her sweater read, "All yours." Her purse was in the kitchen, and her driver's license identified the victim as 23-year-old Julie Kabushi. Julie was born on Valentine's Day 1987 to Japanese-American parents Jun and Masa Kabushi. She was the third of their 4 children. Her parents often called her "my Valentine girl." From an early age, Julie developed a strong interest in dance and music. Her mother said that Julie started tap dancing at the age of 5, and her passion for the sport continued to grow over the years. According to her friends and family, she was a very cheerful person. Her cheerful and bubbly personality brought laughter to everyone. She radiated positivity and often helped her friends when they were in trouble. While respecting her Japanese heritage, she also pursued a free-spirited, all-American lifestyle. After graduating from the Orange County School of the Arts, Julie pursued fashion design at Orange Coast Community College. There, she formed a close relationship with 26-year-old Sam Har and even tutored him in anthropology. Little did she know that her kindness would eventually lead to her tragic fate. As the police investigated the crime scene, they attempted to discover what happened to this energetic young woman, Julie. The evidence clearly pointed to Sam as her killer. Since she was found in his apartment and he was now missing, the police needed to dig deeper into Sam Har's life. Sam Har was born on May 29, 1983, in Los Angeles, California, to Stephen and Raquel Kalberman. As an only child, he received a lot of affection from his parents. His father was a special education teacher while his mother stayed home. Sam had a close relationship with his parents and visited them often. Sam was large and athletic, and friends described him as a big teddy bear. As a child, he enlisted in the United States Army, serving a tour of duty in both Afghanistan and Germany with the 173rd Airborne Division. After 3 years of service, he was discharged and returned to Southern California to take advantage of the GI Bill and finish college. Sam aimed to finish college and then re-enlist in the Army as an officer. Sam enrolled in Orange Coast Community College there. He became friends with Julie, who was 3 years younger than him. However, after 3 years in the Army, Sam developed PTSD, a common condition among veterans. Police wondered if he had lost control and committed the crime in a moment of intense emotion. When Julie was found dead in Sam's apartment and he was missing, detectives suspected that he had fled the scene after the murder. The situation became more suspicious when they discovered text messages on Julie's phone from Sam. At around 2:45 p.m. on May 21, 2010, Sam texted Julie to say he was going to help a friend and then come to his parents' house. However, just 2 hours later, his text messages changed. He contacted her multiple times, begging her to come over. The urgency in his messages made it clear that something was wrong. Concerned about her friend, Julie agreed to visit him, expressing her willingness to support him as family. Sam's messages showed that he had planned her visit. Furthermore, Sam's car and passport were missing from the apartment, leading the police to suspect that he was trying to evade arrest. With both his passport and car missing, it seemed that Sam would soon be identified as the killer. However, the police would soon discover that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. Back in 2002, when Sam was 18, he was charged with the murder along with 17 others in the stabbing and beating death of 19-year-old Byron Benito in Canyon Country. On January 15, 2002, Sam, who had known Byron since childhood, picked him up and took him to a location behind a mobile home park where a group of suspected gang members attacked and killed Byron. Although Sam was charged with murder, he was eventually acquitted, but this did not ease the police's suspicions of him. Sam's family believes in his innocence, but the police believe they are after the right suspect. Since Sam is trained in the use of firearms, he will be armed. Fearing that they are dealing with a dangerous criminal, the police issue a warrant for Sam's arrest. Meanwhile, Costa Mesa police begin monitoring Sam's cell phone and credit card transactions to find him. They learn that he has made 4 ATM withdrawals since his disappearance. Additionally, his credit card was used at a pizza delivery restaurant in Long Beach, California, just 20 miles from Sam's home. The police hoped to find Sam on surveillance footage, but when the bank provided the ATM recording, they were shocked to see a teenager in a hoodie and baseball cap withdrawing money from Sam's bank account. Neither the police nor Sam's parents were able to identify the teenager. Police believe he may be helping Sam escape or hide. Costa Mesa police are eager to find him. On May 26, 2010, police learned that Sam's credit card had been used at another pizza delivery service and began tracking the delivery driver. After obtaining the delivery address, they rushed to the location, thinking they had finally found Sam's hideout. However, when police raided the home, they did not find Sam, but instead found 17-year-old Wesley Freelich and several of his friends. Despite being suspected, police immediately ruled Wesley out as a suspect, but he still had Sam's credit card on him. Wesley shared a surprising story that police did not expect. He revealed that he had received a credit card with instructions to withdraw cash, but that the card was not given to him by Sam, and he said Daniel Wozniak, a local stage actor Wesley met through community theater, had given him a credit card. Daniel claimed to be a bail bondsman who needed to collect money that Sam owed. While most people might have refused, Wesley saw Daniel as a brother and, not realizing the severity of the situation, agreed to help. In total, $1,900 was withdrawn from the account. Daniel Wozniak's name came to the attention of the police when they discovered an invitation to Daniel's upcoming wedding in Sam's apartment. But who is Daniel really, and what is his relationship to Sam? Did he help Sam escape, or was he involved in the murder? Many questions remain unanswered. Daniel Wozniak, born March 23, 1984, is the youngest of 3 brothers. Because his parents worked long hours, he spent a lot of time with his grandparents after school. Growing up in a wealthy family, Daniel and his family often went on lavish vacations. He was considered a good student at school, getting top grades most of the time. He used pranks, singing, dancing, and magic tricks to attract people's attention. He loved being the center of attention. Realizing that he had a talent for performing on stage, Daniel began acting and singing in musicals in his early 20s. He was quite open-minded about his plans for the future, but was never able to hold down a job for long, forcing him to move from job to job with very low pay. However, he kept his passion for acting and continued to participate in theater. It was in one of these musicals that he met his dream partner, an actress. After a short period of dating, they decided to marry on May 26, 2010. The police found Daniel while he was celebrating his bachelor party in Huntington Beach, California. He was related to Sam Hart because they lived in the same apartment complex. The police suspected that Daniel may have helped Sam escape or hide, or that he was involved in Julie's murder. With an arrest warrant in hand, the police interrupted Daniel's bachelor party. His expression changed when he saw the police, and they took him into custody for questioning. In the interrogation room, Wozniak initially claimed that his only crime was participating in credit card fraud and covering up for Sam. He explained to the police that he and Sam had planned to drain his bank account with Wesley's help and then claimed that he had stolen the credit cards. However, Daniel claimed that before they could carry out their plan, Sam made a shocking confession. He added that after this confession, he dropped Sam off at a local shopping mall and had not seen him since. However, the police believed that he was still covering for Sam and that he had more to do with Julie's murder than he had told them. The police changed their approach by taking a DNA sample from Daniel, which made him appear nervous. As he tried to remain calm, the police sensed that something was wrong. Almost immediately, he began adding more details to his statement. The police asked, "Can you explain what happened to Sam?" Daniel replied, "I told him I needed to move some objects in the theater. I said, 'Lift this up,' and as he bent down, I grabbed the gun. I had never fired a gun before, so I pulled the trigger and shot him." The police realized that Daniel is worried that his DNA might be found at Sam's apartment, despite his attempts to downplay the issue. Under pressure, he continually changes his story. After a brief silence, Daniel says that he knows about Julie's murder and that he helped Sam escape. When the police remind him that they have his DNA, he insists that it does not match anything on Julie's body, insisting that he had nothing to do with the murder. The police expect him to share more information, but he abruptly decides to end the interview. Knowing the seriousness of the situation, the police press him for more information, warning that he will be arrested for accessory to murder if he does not come clean and give them full details. Daniel also has a lot at stake. He has a wedding scheduled in just 48 hours and he does not want to miss it. Under pressure, he began to collapse, causing the situation to change. The police, noticing his distress, rushed into questioning by falsely claiming that they had found his DNA on Julie's body. In reality, it took weeks for the DNA test results to come back, but Daniel did not dispute this claim. Instead, he explained that his DNA was present because he had been right above her. When his fabrications were exposed, he made a startling confession. This alarmed the police because initially only one gunshot wound was found at the crime scene. It was only after an autopsy that a second gunshot wound was discovered. Daniel's confession meant that he had been present when she was killed, making him an accomplice to the murder, allowing the police to formally arrest him. Even though Daniel was in custody, the police still needed to locate Sam, and Daniel remained silent as they searched for clues about Sam. While in prison, Daniel called his fiancée, Rachel Buffett. When Rachel chose freedom over love, she told him that she would speak to the police about the case. Daniel knew that he had to talk to the police before Rachel did. Suddenly, he panicked, desperate to reach a deal with the police that he had refused to do just hours before. But what he told the police this time was beyond their imagination. The story begins on May 21, 2010, when Daniel asks Sam to help him with a task, moving some boxes in the attic of a theater at a local military base. While Sam is busy moving the boxes and his back is turned, Daniel suddenly pulls out a gun and shoots Sam in the head. At first, Sam doesn't know what happened, but when he realizes he's been shot, he begs Daniel for help. Without hesitation, Daniel loads the gun and shoots Sam a second time, killing him on the spot. After killing Sam, Daniel proceeds to send Julie messages from Sam's phone, inviting her to Sam's apartment. Without any remorse, he leaves Sam's body in the attic and spends the night laughing, singing, and dancing, as if he hadn't just taken an innocent life. That night, Daniel returns to the apartment and when Julie arrives, he shoots her twice in the head. He then staged the crime scene to make it appear as if Sam had attacked and killed Julie before fleeing. Daniel was also determined to hide Sam's body. In a desperate and gruesome act, he returned to the loft and cut off Sam's hands and head to conceal his identity. He dumped the body in a nearby park. Despite these horrific actions, Daniel returned to the theater as if nothing had happened. Police later found photos from the film's parties showing him laughing and joking with other members of the crew. The motive for these shocking murders was even more disturbing. It was all about money. Daniel had been struggling financially for a long time and was facing eviction, having been 2 months behind on his rent. He also had no way to pay for the lavish wedding honeymoon he had planned. When Daniel discovers that Sam has $62,000 in savings from his time in the military, he makes the cold-blooded decision to kill 2 innocent people to fund his lavish wedding and vacation. When the police discover the backpack containing the evidence Rachel mentioned to Daniel, it becomes clear just how damaging its contents can be. Daniel's brother, Tim, was told to get rid of the backpack but instead threw it over the fence at their parents' house. The backpack contained a number of incriminating items, including Sam's financial information, passport, bloody clothing, and most importantly, the murder weapon. Daniel's DNA was found on these items, placing him solely responsible for the murders of Julie and Sam. The evidence was overwhelming, including DNA, spent shell casings, and the victim's financial records, everything the prosecutor could possibly need, including the murder weapon itself. On December 16, 2015, after a trial that lasted just 5 days, Daniel Wozniak was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 11, 2016, after just 1 hour of deliberation, one of the shortest death penalty trials ever, the jury recommended the death penalty for Daniel Wozniak. On September 23, 2016, the judge sentenced him to death. It seemed there was no end to the deception in this case. Years later, police discovered that Daniel's ex-fiancée, Rachel Buffett, not only knew about the murder plots, but also lied to the police. Although she denied all charges, she was arrested and charged with 3 felony counts of being an accessory after the fact, based on allegations that she had repeatedly lied to the police. On September 12, 2018, she was convicted of 2 of those charges, carrying a maximum possible sentence of 44 months. On November 8, 2018, she was sentenced to 32 months in prison and was released from prison in about 2019.